Hello, everyone. This is Stephanie, your Youth and Community Librarian from the Medicine Hat Public Library, and welcome to our first annual Halloween Comic Fest. We are so excited to have Eric Dyck with us today, leading us through a comic workshop. He is a local Lethbridge artist. He is the creator of the comic Slaughterhouse, and thank you again so much for coming, Eric, and being here with us virtually. And I'm going to turn it over to you and have the fun get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And hello, Medicine Hat. Very nice job with the costumes. That's really great to see. Keep up that Halloween spirit, even if it is a pandemic. Good job. Now, because everyone here has different levels of experience and different levels of practice, we're going to start with some fundamentals just so I can get you all kind of on the same page as I am when it comes to creating and making stuff. We're going to talk about taking things back to basics to make them a little easier to understand. Part of that is going to be drawing with shapes. So when you are drawing something, it can be quite intimidating. If I say, draw a dragon, whoa, that's a lot going on. You've got scales and horns and wings and huge muscles and things to worry about. If I said, let's draw a cone, a circle, and 3 triangles, that seems a little less intimidating, but we're going to talk about ways to take simple things and put them together in more complex ways so that we can get away with a more complex construction. And it looks like everyone has paper, is that right? And pencils? You're good to go. So what we can do is I'm just going to chat a little bit once I start sharing my screen, and I'll give you a heads up when we're going to start drawing along together on the page. So bear with me here while I start to share our screen, and I'll get my little handy pencil ready here. And we are jumping in. Please let me know if you can see my screen okay. We're just going to move this over here. So when I'm talking about drawing with shapes, I really mean basic shapes. So we're talking about some really elementary things like circles. In the case of characters that have dimension, we're actually talking about a sphere. So it's round, it's 3-dimensional. I'm talking about blobs. We're talking about jelly beans. We're talking about lumps that we can put on. I'm looking for markers, things that can remind me where things go when I construct a face. The reason I'm starting with a face here is just because as cartoonists, we're storytellers, and stories often involve characters and the characters reacting to things around them. And so the head or the face is a pretty logical place to start. Now, some of you might be really into drawing comics about humans. Some of you might be drawing comics about animals or creatures. It doesn't matter. We're going to start with some fundamentals. It'll start to make sense as it applies to the things you like, the kind of cartoonist that you are. That will relate to you in a little bit as we apply some of this stuff. So one thing I want to talk about here, I'm going to switch to an ink layer with an ink pen. Now, I know you don't have comic pens or things like that necessarily. If you brought some of your own, hey, that's fun. But I want to do this just because it's higher contrast. So it's easier for you to see. So can you see the sketchy, scribbly pencil lines okay? And this is what my ink line looks like. Is that okay? Excellent. So when I'm looking at the shapes like I have here in my sketch, I'm going to start building. I'm looking to see where the shapes are kind of like my map to tell me where the details go. So I'm going to put some time into putting some details here, but I already have the sketch. So I'm not worried about my drawings being in the wrong place or some of the things that take me a second or two to draw. I'm not worried about misplacing those because I've taken the time to build my sketch. I can have much more expressive and fun-looking lines because I took the time to figure out where things go with my sketchy pencil lines. And I can even start to mess around with lots of ink or little bits of ink or even maybe texture. And I'm free to do that because I took the time to plan out my sketch. I know where everything goes. I know how things fit underneath clothing. I don't have to worry about planning all that out in the middle of a drawing because my sketch did that hard work for me. And so right here, you can see the sketching lines that I used before, and I'm building up the character that actually looks like someone now. I've got some texture, I've got some things that ruffled whiskers or a schlumpy hat, things that can help to make a character stand out and to help them look like someone or something. But without that sketchy line that I had before, I wouldn't know where those details go. You've probably seen someone start drawing a really amazing eye and you're like, oh my goodness, they're a really good artist. And then they pull out and then realize that they've got to draw another eye and they've got to draw a nose and they've got a mouth, and all the things are starting to float away because they didn't really plan out their drawing. And so that's what we're going to practice here together, is kind of planning out a drawing to help us understand that a little bit. I'm just going to rotate my canvas here too, and I'll switch back to my sketchy pencils like you have. And we're going to build a head together, and I'm just going to walk through the process that I use every single time I draw together with you. So on your page, not too big, not too small, maybe the size of your palm, we're just going to draw a circle. It doesn't have to be a great circle. It can be a lumpy, wiggly circle. It doesn't have to be, don't trace your water bottle or something. I just want a human being drawn circle. And I'll pause a little bit here to make sure that you've got some time for working out some stuff on your own page. And if I'm going too slow, I'm sure Stephanie will let me know. Once you have that circle on your page, I'd like a line down the middle. And a line going the other way as well. This cartoon head construction is kind of a combination of Christopher Hart, whose books you'll find in the Medicine Hat Library for sure, and Mark Crilly, who does a lot of how to draw manga. They both have it a little bit different. This is just sort of my blended version of the two of them. I would like you to put one more line on between the middle line and the bottom of the circle for me. So there'll be one more line right here. Where the line connects to the circle, where those little X's are, I would like you to just draw a lump or a bump that touches at each of these points. The construction we've done here is really a 1 and 2 part head. The number 1 shape is the skull. You can even feel that on your own head, depending on your costume. You can feel how round your skull is. It's hard, it doesn't move very much. Where the jaw connects to your skull is kind of just below your ears. So you can even feel underneath your ears and open your mouth. You can kind of feel your mouth opening up and that jaw shape, which is this, moving and flexing, getting bigger or smaller. And those 2 parts to our head are going to be the things that we can use as the building blocks to create a character. On your sketch paper that you're building right now, this space between the 2 lines here, I want to kind of treat that as where the eyes go. And so we're just going to put some circles there to remind us where the eyes are. Between your eyes is where most noses start, and I'm just going to draw a triangle between the eyes and kind of down to the bottom of the circle. That's kind of the top of the mandible. If you put your finger between your lip and your nose, you can kind of feel your teeth under there, and that's where the teeth are hiding out in your skull. On shape number 2, which is the jaw, we're going to put just a little smiley face to remind us that's where the mouth goes. If you touch your eyebrows, which are just above your eyes, and if you trace back along your head, you'll find the top of your ear. Your earlobes are usually in line with the bottom of your nose. So let's put some cookies on this character in around that area on either side, just to remind us where, just a little cookie shape, nothing fancy, to remind us where the ears go. The great thing about cartooning is that it takes very few lines to communicate something. Now, this isn't a great drawing, but it is a face. And we can see and recognize a face in this sketchy, scribbly mess. That's really impressive. That's something that's amazing about cartooning. Dyck Brown's quote about cartooning is, it's the shortest distance between an idea and the understanding of that idea. So already we have communicated on our page face. Is it a good face? No. Do we know who it is? Not really. It's not very interesting face in that way. But we have our map in place already. We have the building blocks that we need to create a character. You're going to pause for a moment. I'm going to just build in some detail on this character, but don't you worry about following along with that because everyone is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to knock the opacity back here just so we can see it a bit better. So in the case of my character with my generic head and skull and jaw shape here, we can really take this off somewhere. We can create a character. Oops, I need a new layer. Boop. Sorry, hang on. Boop, there we go. We could have a character with really fluffy eyebrows. We could have a character with a really bumpy nose. This character might have really tired eyes. We could add some lines, some detail that help communicate that. Maybe this character isn't even very happy. We're going to give him a bumpy chin to go with that bumpy nose, bumpy ear details to go with that bumpy nose. Maybe this character has some really schloofy hair. I'm building it up a little bit. It's even bigger than his skull. You can feel your own hair. Your hair is bigger than your skull because it's sitting on top of it like clothing. And already that character has quite a bit more personality, has quite a bit more specificity. It seems like someone who might be part of a story. And that's where I want you to go with your weird generic skull head, but I want you to do different details than I did. So is your character going to have is your character going to have some defining features like a pointy nose or a very round nose? Is your character going to have a very slender, gentle, delicate nose? Are they going to be little tiny beady eyes? Are they going to be great, big, shiny Pokemon Disney eyes? It's totally up to you what characteristics you put on top of your sketchy skull head. So I want you to go ahead now and take some time to start adding details to your paper. Let's create different characters on every page. Your skull head might look like your neighbor's right now, but as you add details, everyone's will become more distinct and more individual as we go on. As you get to each different characteristic of the face, do think about the character you're creating. Are there things that could be echoed or mimicked? Is there accessories that are going to be important? Does your character need glasses or makeup or a specific facial feature? Maybe some jewelry or headwear will be appropriate for your character. Think about the hair. Remember that hair is bigger than the skull. Even if you have a crew cut on your character, it's still going to be a little bit bigger than the head shape. And if you've got great big flowing locks of hair on your character, they're really going to grow out of the character's head. And they're going to be great big flowing pieces. They might even cover up some of the hair or ears, and that's okay. The head that we drew together was pretty generic. I told you what circle to draw. I told you how to draw a bump. But those, when you look around the room, even underneath those costumes, are heads of very different shapes. You want your characters to look distinct and unique. And part of that is because that's what we recognize about the world around us, is that everyone looks a little bit different. We have round chins and pointy chins. We have all kinds of different slender or wide head shapes. And our characters need to look diverse in the same way. On your sketch paper, whether it's in a different corner or on the back, or if you need a fresh piece from Stephanie, whatever, I would like to start exploring with some different kinds of head shapes. So this one, for example, is a much wider skull shape. and I've got a pointy little jaw shape. And that can help us to really build a different looking character. It gets me some more space for some bigger eyes. It's a smaller shape for kind of a smaller nose. And we've got room for a character that's going to just look a little bit different and stand out from the last one. It gives us a different kind of canvas for drawing different hairstyles. And we've got some room here to start playing with a different character and have them look quite a bit different. And so that can be a really easy way to get unique looking characters, is just to start out with different looking head shapes. Here's one with a really big number 2 shape and a tiny little number 1 shape. And that already creates quite a bit of a different space for putting the eyes and the nose, which go on shape number 1. The mouth goes on shape number 2. It's really big, and that just makes me want to draw a great big mouth. I'm still building the ears at the junction there, and we start to get a very different feeling character just because we've got some very different head shapes. And that can push you and help you respond in a way that gets you a much more diverse looking cast of characters. Those shapes don't even have to be organic. Shape number 1 is a triangle, shape number 2 is a triangle. And that can force us into some very angular character designs. Maybe I'll keep going with triangles, triangle eyes, triangle nose, triangle mouth. And we start to get a character that feels sharp and kind of dangerous and unpleasant right from the very beginning. And we know that that character is going to share those feelings just by being made of the kinds of shapes that are kind of pointy and unpleasant. And so on your page, I would like you to start building 2 more heads, but with really different shapes than we played with last time. And keep in mind as well that we want to open it up. So if you're more interested in drawing animals, you still have a skull shape, but your jaw shape is maybe going to be quite a bit different. And so on this jaw shape, we've got number 1, the skull, number 2, the jaw. But in the case of a dog, for example, your eyes would be on shape number 1, but your nose would be on shape number 2. Your ears would be on shape number 1, but your mouth would be on shape number 2. And so that, just by adding some different kinds of details, can get you some critters and creatures that look quite a bit different, but the construction's the same. So on your page, I'd like you to draw really different head shapes. Go really big, go really small, go wobbly, go jagged. Try something different to get yourself some different looking characters. While you're doing that, I'll keep playing on the board here. You're drawing 2 different characters with really different head shapes. If you're drawing a creature like a cat, you've got your skull shape, but you've got a very small jaw shape. The cat's jaw is so small it's even part of the head shape. You've got great big eyes. You've got a tiny little muzzle. And scary murder eyes. If you're looking at a bird or a dinosaur, you've got a great big jaw shape. All that head construction needs to fit into that number 1 shape. Creatures and monsters, you're going to need to draw really over-the-top, grotesque shapes to start with, and that will help you when you're creating something that looks really different. These characters should feel a little bit the way they are even before you start any of the details. You're designing a couple of new characters for us based on really different head shapes. The shapes a character is designed with can become really iconic. When you're looking at a rectangle and a star, it doesn't take much before you start to recognize characters that you are very familiar with. Just built in those shapes are recognizable characters. It doesn't take much to trigger that same kind of reaction. Even if you're looking at classic Mickey Mouse, it does not take much to realize that it is just a combination of circles. Whether you're drawing human or creature or animal, totally up to you. And I would like you to choose one of your characters that you have drawn that you like, you feel like you could work with it again. Try to pick a character that you're going to be comfortable drawing again. And what I want us to do is to start to treat the characters as if they're in 3 dimensions. And so we're going to try to turn one of the heads around. We want them to look to the side, or what's called the profile view of your character. And to do that, one thing that can make it a bit easier is just to create some landmarks from your own sketch. So I know that the skull shape of this cat is going to fit within those 2 lines. That can help me get started. I know that the jaw or the muzzle of the cat fits between those 2 lines. And so I can create that right on the side there. The eyes fit right about there. And so I know that the cat's eyes are going to be looking forward from that point there. Where it gets tricky is we start to think of things that we looked at when they were straight on. In this one, we need to think about, what does that cat look like from the side? Is the upper lip a bit bigger than the bottom lip? Is the cheeks that I drew fuzzy here, are they going to show how fuzzy they are from the side there? We're going to see a little bit of the side of the cat as well. These ears that are quite large, the ears are about the same size as the eyes, but they're going to be facing forward this time. And I just know from my experience of looking at cats is that they kind of create little satellite dishes catching sounds. They're a bit more curved on the back and flat at the front. And there's those murder eyebrows again. And I know that this is going to have a fairly decent representation of what this cat looks like. If you've got lines that are in the way or you don't want to see them anymore, you can always erase them. There's lines that you don't need and lines that you do, and you can decide which ones need to be kept for the sake of your drawing. If you've got a character with quite a prominent nose, I want you to think about how that nose would stick out if that character is looking to the side. And so that's something you need to think about, that we couldn't really tell how big the nose was in this drawing, but you're really going to need to show how it sticks out. When you're drawing the head, remember that that skull shape needs to have a brain in it. So don't squish it too much to be flat. You want to make sure that we can see the head. When you're drawing a human head from the side, I want you to remember as well that your ears are kind of in the middle. So we had the ears between the nose and the eyebrows, but remember that if you look at your neighbor, you can kind of see that their ears are kind of in the middle of their head, right about there. And I'd like you to choose one of the characters you drew and let's turn them to the side. Let's see their profile view. And let's just practice thinking about our characters in the 3 dimensions. What does your character look like from the side? You'll have to give some thought to your character's hair as well, because you didn't have to think about the back of their head all that much when you drew their hairstyle, but you're going to have to figure out how that hair works now, because we can see the back of the head. When I'm drawing a character's hair, I try to think about if it's flowing and moving. Imagine brushing that character's hair with a brush. Where would you start? Where would you finish? What kind of movements would you make? That can help the hair to look a little more realistic, even if it's quite cartoony. If you were brushing their hair like a doll, what direction would your brush move in? Turning a head around like this in 3 dimensions means you're also kind of treating it almost like a sculpture inside your head. How's it going out there? Is it, anyone want to have any questions or anything? Is there anything a bit frustrating?
How do you do an upturned nose?
So starting out from looking straight on, when you're looking at that nose, you want to be sure that it doesn't get too piggy, unless that's the nature of the character. But you can certainly show that looking a little more slender or a little more gentle. If it's a more realistic nose, then just decide how many lines you add in. An actual nose has all kinds of gorky lines and shapes and things that the more lines you add, it might look more realistic, but you'll end up making the character look a lot older. Same thing with eyes. If you're drawing an eye and you just leave it very simple with the eyebrow and whatnot, if you start adding in different kinds of lines that maybe everybody has, but when we see them, our brains think, oh, that's a really old, aged character. And you just want to be careful with how much detail you add, depending on how old you want that character to look. And so we can show the underside of a character's nose without making them look like they're 1,000 years old. But just take care that it doesn't get too pig-like and that it just looks a little more round and friendly. If you look at old Peanuts cartoons, the characters' noses were always right smack in the middle between their eyes. But when they were exasperated and frustrated, their nose would go way up to the top and they would be yelling. But when you look up, your ears drop way down. And so Charles Schulz was an excellent artist. Even though he was keeping it really simple and cartoony, he knew that those ears drop down when your nose goes up. And so if you look back at some of those old drawings, they were, even if they're just simple circles, they're really expertly drawn. And then they would say something like, "Ugh." On the back of your paper, on a fresh piece of paper, you're going to need a little more room because we're going to go from head to toe on our next drawing. The head, we've done this a few times now. So if you've got a character that you're enjoying or original character of your own that you've already made, you can use that character head again. We're developing character with 2 shape heads, shape 1 and shape 2, but we are going to expand now into the rest of the body. I want you to treat it, though, just like we do with the head, in the sense of look for those really basic shapes, those simple forms that can be a little less intimidating than thinking about rib cages and pelvises and spines. I want you to keep it a little more simple than that. One thing, if you were watching me draw on the board, that I tried to do right away is I figure out how tall the character is for head and bottom. And I also think about where the middle of that character is. Your height typically is your legs start about half of your height. But of course, when you're doing cartoons, everything's a little bit different. We talked about Charlie Brown before, and he's about 2 heads tall. And so that giant egg-shaped head of his, it's not much bigger than the rest of his body. And so those are goofy things that you can play with characters. That's totally up to you. Just for the sake of building some today, we're going to talk about a character's legs being about half their height. And so I want you to think about, in the case of my character here, I use kind of a jelly bean shape for the body. I use circles because I want to think about where things bend. So your leg bends at your hip and your knee and your ankle. Your hand, your elbow, and your shoulders are joints that I want to remember. I'm going to keep those in mind. When you think about how long the arms are supposed to be, just remember that inside that body is a rib cage. Hey, Halloween. And your elbow lines up with your bottom rib. And if you're not sure about that, take your elbow and feel your own bottom rib. Your arms are usually about as long as your front pocket. And so you can line up or feel where your hip socket is. That hip bone and the leg bone where they join, that's kind of how long your hands reach down. So little things like that can help you out with figuring out how big limbs are supposed to be. But what I want you to just play with is getting from head to toe without any details, shapes only. What does your character look like from head to toe? If you're working on a creature, just keep in mind that those shapes are going to be the same. And your limbs are just going to be a little bit different. But shapes are still the underlying structure of the character that we're building. And so we're going to work on this character from head to toe without any details. I don't want to see hairstyles. I don't want to see costumes yet. Don't worry about any details. Just know what they look like, head to toe, shapes only. Once you have your body shapes in place, you can start to think about building the rest of the character. We've done the heads together, and so you know how details fit on top of those heads. But as we get down to the rest of the body, you need to start thinking about not just your character's body type, but also the costume. You're a storyteller. These characters are your actors. You tell them what to look like and you tell them what to wear. And so you're going to be deciding right away what kind of clothing they're wearing, if it's an actual costume, or if it's even just a shirt and jeans, that's their costume for your story. And so you just need to decide what this character's going to be wearing. And is that clothing loose and baggy? Is that clothing going to be tight and form-fitting like a superhero? Are you going to be able to see muscles underneath that clothing? Is it just going to be all baggy wrinkles? What's this character like? How would they dress going out into the world? If I'm drawing baggy clothes, then I'm going to be drawing clothing that is much bigger than the arm underneath it. If you're drawing tight clothing, it's going to form around that arm that you drew very closely. You can tell where an arm comes out of a baggy sleeve because you drew those arms and limbs beforehand in your sketches. Now that I've adding some detail, I can start to worry about what ways that fingers and the hand details are going to be important. I wouldn't get too stressed out with fingernails or knuckles or anything complicated right now. We're just trying to remember how these shapes help us figure out the more complex parts of character. And so keep the hands simple, keep them sausagey and noodly. I'm going to refine the detail a little bit on my character's legs here. I just want to see the shapes of the muscles under there a little more than I had them sketched out. And so when it comes time to draw the clothing on the bottom part of the body, that's going to be completely up to you. what they're wearing, but I do want you to think about a few things. Like if this character has a cloak or a robe, I want you to keep in mind that that cloak or robe or dress needs to hold the legs inside. And so we need to remember what parts of the body are underneath there. That's why I always draw the body whole, even if it gets covered up later. If you draw a skirt or a dress on a character, you don't want the legs coming out any which way. You need to think about exactly where that character's feet come out. And so that when you're drawing the shoes or drawing the appendages coming out the bottom, you know exactly where they come out because you drew all this before. Even if you end up covering everything up afterwards, even if that's an opaque dress that you can't see anything underneath, you know that that foot is coming out in the right place because you drew the body underneath beforehand. And so you planned it out. Even if you've got great big baggy whooshy sleeves, know what that arm looks like, know where those hands come out so that you can draw them properly. All the details, all the extra things that you put on a character, after, that's all just about the details where you're getting to know your character and showing how they express themselves. The shapes underneath are your map, so you know where those details go. So when we think about a character like Charlie Brown dressing up for Halloween, if he's going to be wearing a ghost costume, I'm going to draw that character's whole body, even if his ghost costume is going to cover up his whole body. I know where the eyes go now. I know where the arms are tucked in, and I know where the feet come out when I draw that character because I planned it out ahead of time. Even if you end up erasing the whole character, you know that that character fits under that blanket. You know that the character's feet are coming out in the right place and that the eyes are in the right place. I sketch out that whole body, even if I'm just going to end up erasing it afterwards. I know that everything is where it's supposed to be. And I know that it's a bit tricky the way I'm showing you on the screen here because I have layers that I can turn on and off. But even when I'm sketching on paper, if I'm done with some shapes, oops, wrong layer, that I don't need anymore, I can start to erase them and just leave behind the most important lines, even if I'm just working in pencil. And that can clean up your drawing quite a bit, leaving behind the choices that you as the cartoonist made, what lines are most important, which ones are going to be kept. We drew our characters looking fairly stiff, and the character that I drew there was really kind of looking like stiff, standing there like a cutout doll. What I want to see now is your characters looking a little more alive, a little more dynamic. And so when I'm thinking of action, I often think of action lines. So even a line like this tells me what my character is going to look like when they're standing. And that can bring a lot of energy and a lot of emotion to how they're behaving. And so if I've got a character who is defeated and slumpy, I'm going to draw a sad little line like that. And that can help me figure out what that character looks like as they're schloofing along, looking all sad. And so those action lines, here's one that might be looking really angry and defensive. I want to see those characters show some of those emotions. I'm keeping it loose and scribbly, but when I'm ready, I would start to get into the detail and start to figure out what the body parts of that character look like, figure out where the joints are, and I would start to fill in the details. But that energy, that initial scribble is what I like to try and keep, and it helps our characters feel more alive and helps them act. So what I would like you to do is to draw your character that you've now figured out the body for, but I want to see them doing some different things. Maybe they are jumping. Maybe they are sitting. Maybe they are hurt or surprised. Maybe they are throwing a watermelon. Maybe they are catching a feather. What does your character look like? And how does its body change to show some of these different things? And so with just our few minutes left here, I'd like you to get to know this character better by making them do some things, by having things happen to their body. What if this character fell? What if this character suddenly floated? What would they look like if these things happened to their body? Just don't forget to start out with those basic shapes. Don't forget to build the detail once you're happy with where your shapes are. When you think about the comics or the animated shows that you really like, the artists who created those for you, they have drawn those characters dozens and dozens of times to get to know them as best they can. If you like one of the artists that makes things you like, you can even look them up online and see if they make character sheets. They might even show you 20 drawings of their character doing different things so that they could get to know how those characters moved. A good example of this might be the Bone books by Jeff Smith. If you're looking at those characters, Smiley and Phony Bone and Bone, if they all did something the same like jumping, their characters are so different, they would look really different doing it. The character of Aunt Ben or the other humans in the story, if they're sitting down around a fire, they're going to look very different doing it than the Bone Brothers would. Those are different things you can look for in the stories you like to learn a little bit more about how characters behave. The Hilda books by Luke Pearson are also a really good example. The story of the Midnight Giant has a character that's huge, a character that's very small, and a character that's really tiny, and they all walk differently. And depending on how much weight they have to carry or how magical they are going to move through their environment differently. And that's something you can look for in those stories too. Just by how the character moves is part of the storytelling. As you've probably figured out in this hour we spent together, cartooning can be a lot of work. And part of being a cartoonist is just loving putting that work in. Sometimes it's stressful, sometimes it's really, really hard, and sometimes it's just momentum and you're excited and you're really happy to be doing it.
So she drew a robot as a robot, doesn't know emotion. So how would you draw him with emotions or emoting?
Well, you wouldn't necessarily, because you are dealing with a character who doesn't have emotions. However, that lack of emotions could also read as confusion. And so one thing that's going to be important there is that you're creating a character that robot is responding to. So you might have a person who's freaking out and mad at the robot, and the robot is just not entirely sure what's going on. And the robot is just stiff and not going, I'm not sure what's happening here. Or the robot could be really indignant and even though he doesn't necessarily have emotions, that robot may not respect the fact that human is going through those things and it just doesn't want anything to do with them and is leaving. There's different things that as humans we can read into a character's emotions, even just by them behaving and acting a certain way. Are you thinking more about their facial features or?
No, I think that was very helpful.
Okay. And part of comics is relationships too. And so maybe we wouldn't understand this robot being indifferent so much until we saw this person spazzing out and freaking out and, I'm so mad at you. That's relationship is really going to help us understand that better. If this character were really sad or hurt and upset at the robot, that's going to tell a very different story when this robot is acting the exact same way. We're going to be reading and seeing this character as someone we sympathize with or someone that we think is really cruel. It really depends on what the character we can relate to better is behaving like.
That's very interesting. I had never thought about that.
You're also going to see the Japanese are really good at this, where the characters that they want you to relate to are really simple and expressive. And then the characters that the antagonists that they don't want us to relate to are often drawn with way more detail and way more specificity. And it's harder for us to relate to someone who has a lot of detail and doesn't look like us. When we see a character that looks really friendly and happy, or even just simple like that, we're going to be able to identify with that character easily because there's no unique characteristics that will make them feel specific. So we can say, oh, this feels like me and that feels like someone other, and that can really drive their storytelling. And the Bone comics are a good example of that. When the Bone Brothers are super simple looking characters, it's easy for us to identify with them. All the humans in the Bone books are really specific, and they have textured skin, and they really look like someone in particular. It's more likely that someone's going to identify with one of the Bones than identify with one of the humans, because it's harder to see yourself in someone who looks very specifically like someone. And that, if you're feeling super nerdy, is called comics theory. And I'm sure that Stephanie can help you figure out how to get your hands on a Scott McCloud book if you really want to geek out and worry your parents.
I've read his book. It's very, very good. It's very good.
Another thing I can recommend if you want to get to know that character better physically is to get your hands on some Sculpey or some clay and actually build your character. And then you can really turn it around. And I'll do that with characters that I need to spend time with, or that I need to know what they look like from behind or something, to actually build them or dress up like them and have someone take pictures of you can help you to figure out what they might look like. What does their hood look like when they're hunching their shoulders up? What do they look like if they have big baggy pockets? How do they look from the side?
Well, thank you so much for being here virtually, Eric. We have learned so much from you today, and we just cannot thank you enough for being here today and teaching us the basics of comics.
My pleasure. I'm really glad to see everyone drawing. I hope you keep it up.
Awesome. Thank you. All right.
And happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Eric.
A pleasure. Thanks, Stephanie.
Yeah. You have a wonderful weekend, and stay safe.
And I look forward to working with you again.
Yes, hopefully in person next time.
All right. Take care.
You too. Bye.